Welcome back to the FBS podcast. We're all about giving you practical info to help you succeed in your forestry career. So today, we're going to do a deep dive on something you might not know a lot about. USDA Rural Development's Value-Added Producer Grants, or VAPG for short.
Yeah, VAPG, a lot of people in the forest industry, they hear that name and they think, well, that's not for me, right? That's for farmers.
Right, exactly. That's kind of a common misconception, I think.
It is, and that's why we're here today.
That's what we're going to clear up today. We're going to break down all the details of VAPG, what they are, who can apply, how that whole application process works, what you can and cannot do with the funds. And to make it really relevant for you, we're going to focus on examples from the world of forest products.
That's the key because, we want you to walk away feeling like you really understand this program so you can decide if it's a good fit for your business, if it makes sense for you to apply.
Perfect. So let's get down to it. What are these VAPG grants all about? Like, what's the big picture here?
Okay, so the basic idea is to help agricultural producers, and that includes forest businesses, by the way, to create more value from their products.
So we're not just talking about planting more trees or harvesting more timber. It's about, taking those resources and transforming them into something more.
Yeah, exactly. It's about moving up that value chain. Instead of just selling raw materials, you're creating something with a higher value.
Okay, I see. Can you give us a concrete example of what that might look like?
Sure. Imagine you're a logger, right? But instead of just selling logs to a mill, you decide to start milling your own lumber. Or maybe you're a sawmill and you want to branch out into specialty wood products that command a higher price.
Okay, so taking it to the next level.
Precisely, adding value.
I like it. So are there different types of these grants? Or is it just kind of a one-size-fits-all sort of thing?
No, actually, there are two main types. There are planning grants and then there are working capital grants.
Okay, what's the difference?
So if you're just starting out with a value-added idea and you're not really sure if it's feasible or how to even get started, the planning grant can be a really good first step.
Makes sense. Like you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, right?
Exactly. And the planning grant can help you create that blueprint. It can cover things like feasibility studies, putting together a business plan, market research, all those really important initial steps.
So it's all about laying the groundwork. Okay, what about the working capital grants? What are those for?
Those are for folks who are, they've got their plan in place. They're ready to actually launch their value-added product. And these grants can cover costs associated with, processing your product, marketing it, selling it.
So you get the planning grant to figure out what you want to do,
Okay.
and then the working capital grant to actually, make it happen.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So who can actually apply for these VAPG grants?
That's a good question. And this is where, like I said before, some folks in the forest industry might get tripped up because they see agricultural producer and they think, well, that's not me. I'm not a farmer. But the definition's a little bit broader than that.
So loggers, sawmills, timberland owners, could they potentially be eligible?
Yes, absolutely. As long as, what they're doing is engaging in value-added activities that are related to forest products.
Okay.
But there's one important rule that you have to keep in mind. You have to own and produce at least 50% of the raw material that's being used to create your value-added product.
That 50% rule sounds like a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
Can you give us some specific examples of, how that would apply in the forest industry?
Sure. Let's say you're a logging business, right? And you decide to start milling your own timber into lumber. You would probably meet that 50% requirement because you're owning and harvesting the logs yourself. Or let's say you're a sawmill and at least half of the timber that you're processing, it comes from your own lands. That would also work.
Gotcha. What about a timberland owner who's producing maple syrup? Would they be eligible?
Potentially, yes, if they're tapping trees on their own property and processing the sap into syrup, because that's a value-added activity, right?
Yeah.
Even things like, fence posts. Or if you're producing non-timber forest products like mushrooms, that could be considered too, as long as you meet that 50% ownership threshold.
Okay, so there's definitely some opportunity there for forestry businesses. Let's talk about that application process. Where do you even begin?
Well, the most important thing is to pay close attention to something called the Notice of Funding Availability, also known as the NOFA.
NOFA, okay.
Yeah, and that's the official announcement from USDA Rural Development.
Yeah.
And it's going to lay out all the guidelines, the deadlines, the priorities for that particular grant cycle.
So it's like the rule book for that round of funding.
Yeah.
Where can folks find that NOFA?
You can find it on the USDA Rural Development website. Now, when it comes to applying, USDA often encourages people to consider a phased approach, and that means starting with a planning grant.
So kind of like figure out if your idea has legs before you dive into the deep end.
Yeah, exactly. And remember that planning grant, it can cover things like those feasibility studies we were talking about, business plans, doing some market analysis. So it can really help you make sure that you're setting yourself up for success.
And then once you've got your plan in place, you're in a good position to apply for that working capital grant to actually get things moving.
That's the idea. But before we jump ahead to that, let's talk about another key aspect of VAPG, and that's the cost share requirements.
Okay, so this is where things get real, right? These grants, they're not just free money. You've got to put some skin in the game.
You do. And with VATG, there's a 1.1 match requirement.
Meaning?
It means that for every dollar that you're requesting from the grant, you need to contribute a dollar of your own funds.
Gotcha. So if I'm applying for a $50,000 grant, I need to have another $50,000 in the bank ready to go.
Yeah, basically. But the good news is there's some flexibility in how you meet that match. You can use cash, like your own savings or revenue from your business or even loans, as long as they're not, coming from another federal source.
Okay, so that's cash. What about, are there other ways to meet that match requirement?
You can. You can also use what are called in-kind contributions. And that basically means contributing something other than just straight cash.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of in-kind contributions?
Sure. Your own time and labor can count towards that match. If you have existing facilities or equipment that are going to be used for the project, the value of those assets can be factored in.
Okay.
Even, donated professional services that are related to your project, those can sometimes qualify as well.
So if I'm a timberland owner who wants to produce firewood, and I already own a wood splitter, that splitter could potentially count towards my match.
It's possible, but you would need to work with USDA to, determine the fair market value of those in-kind contributions and make sure that everything's properly documented. That documentation is really important. USDA is going to want to see proof that you have those matching resources available.
Sounds like there's a lot to consider when it comes to this whole cost share element.
There is.
Anything else that folks should keep in mind?
Yeah. Make sure that the expenses that you're covering with your match, they actually align with those eligible activities that are outlined in the grant. And remember, those matching funds need to be spent at the same time as the grant funds. It has to be a simultaneous thing.
Okay. So no stockpiling the grant money and then slowly chipping away at your match.
That's right. It has to be a concurrent effort.
Gotcha. Okay. This is super helpful. Now let's talk about what you can actually use these funds for, once you get the grant. What are you allowed to spend that money on?
With a working capital grant, you actually have quite a bit of flexibility. It can cover things like, purchasing raw materials. So if you're milling lumber, that would be the timber. If you're producing maple syrup, that would be the sap. It can also cover things like packaging materials, branding and marketing expenses, labor costs, and other operating expenses as well. Basically anything that's directly helping you produce and sell that value-added product.
So it's covering those real-world costs of getting your product off the ground.
Yeah, and out into the marketplace.
What about planning grants? What are some of the typical expenses that those cover?
For a planning grant, it's really more about those upfront costs that are associated with assessing and planning your venture. So think consultant fees, market research, and other professional services that can, help you validate your idea and create a really solid plan.
Sounds like both types of grants offer a pretty good range of support. I'm guessing, though, there are some restrictions, right? Yeah. Some of these you definitely cannot use those funds for.
Absolutely. So, for example, you can't use VAPG funds for, things like purchasing equipment or covering construction costs or paying off existing debt.
Okay, so the focus is on supporting the actual operation and growth of your value-added venture, not major capital investments.
Exactly. It's about, taking those raw forest products and transforming them into something more valuable, something that's going to generate more income for your business.
I'm sure some of our listeners right now are thinking, this is great, but where do I even start?
And that's where FBS comes in. Remember, our mission is to provide practical information and support to forestry professionals. And that includes helping you navigate the, sometimes complex world of grants and funding opportunities.
So we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk.
We are. We actually offer services specifically for compiling and submitting VAPG applications.
Really?
We can help gather documentation, put together a strong application package, and, make sure you're meeting all of those USDA requirements. And we do it all for a fixed fee that we agree on up front.
That's awesome. That
Yeah.
takes a lot of the stress out of the process.
Absolutely. And if you're not even sure if VAPG is a good fit for you, we offer consultations. We can sit down with you, help you assess your eligibility, explore your options. Just reach out to us. We're happy to talk.
I love that. FBS is here to support you every step of the way. So before we move on to the next part of our discussion, what are some of the key takeaways you want listeners to kind of walk away with at this point?
Well, first and foremost, don't count yourself out. Forest-based businesses can absolutely qualify for these grants. There's a great tool on the USDA Rural Development website. It's called the VAPG Self-Assessment Survey. And I highly recommend checking that out. It's a good way to kind of get a sense of, whether you might be eligible.
Okay, so consider that your homework assignment, folks.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you're really serious about pursuing VAPG, reach out to your local USDA Rural Development office. They can provide guidance that's really specific to your situation. They can help you navigate the process. They can even, maybe connect you with other producers who've successfully used VAPG grants in the past.
It's like having a mentor, almost.
Yeah, in a way.
Okay, this is all great advice. We are going to dive a little deeper into VAPG in just a minute, so stick with us.
We were just talking about how, forest businesses, they really can qualify for these VAPG grants.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the different kinds of value-added products you could create, It's kind of exciting, actually. We've touched on a few examples like milling lumber or making maple syrup.
Right.
What are some other products or processes that might be like a good fit for a VAPG grant?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the range is broader than you might think, It's not just those traditional forest products. Think about it this way. Like, let's say you're a timberland owner and you're harvesting non-timber forest products,
Okay.
like mushrooms or medicinal plants.
Okay.
You could actually use a VAPG grant to maybe develop a line of herbal teas or tinctures, right?
Right.
You're taking those raw ingredients,
Yeah.
and you're creating a product with a much higher market value.
That's a great example. I love that.
Yeah.
Taking something that might be seen as a niche product,
Right.
and turning it into something with a much broader appeal.
Exactly. And VAPG can even support the marketing side of things too, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can use the grant to, develop a marketing plan,
Yeah.
create a brand identity for your product.
Uh-huh.
Even, maybe set up an online store to reach a wider audience.
So it's not just about making the product, it's about getting that product out there
Right,
into
exactly.
the hands of customers who want it.
That's a really important part of it. And VAPG recognizes that, success in today's world, it takes more than just having a good product. You need to have a strategy for reaching your market, for telling people, hey, this is what I've got and this is why it's valuable.
I'm sold.
Yeah.
I think VAPG has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Applying for any kind of grant can be tough.
Yeah.
What are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes that you see people making when they're applying for these VAPG grants? What advice would you give to someone who's maybe thinking about taking the plunge?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is not carefully reading and understanding that notice of funding availability.
Oh, the NOFA.
The NOFA, yeah.
You got to do your homework.
You do. And it's not enough to just kind of skim through it.
Right.
You really need to understand all of those
That's
details.
the roadmap, basically.
It is. It's your roadmap. It's going to, lay out the eligibility criteria, the application deadlines, the funding priorities for that year.
Right.
All that stuff is in the NOFA, and overlooking those details can really, really hurt your application.
What else? What else should people watch out for?
Another common mistake is not having a really clear and compelling project narrative.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so that's the part of the application where you really get to, tell the story of your value-added venture.
Huh?
It's your opportunity to kind of paint a picture for the reviewers, get them excited about your project.
Oh.
Your narrative needs to explain, what is this product? What makes it unique? Who are you targeting with this product? And how does this project benefit your business and also, your community?
So you need to be able to, tell a good story.
Yeah. And you need to be able to communicate it in a way that anyone can understand.
Yeah.
Because remember, the people who are reviewing these applications, they might not be forestry experts.
Right.
So you want to avoid getting lost in technical jargon and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. What else? What else tends to trip people up?
Don't underestimate the importance of a solid financial plan. You need to have a detailed budget that shows exactly how you plan to use those grant funds and your matching funds as well.
So it's not enough to just say, I need X dollars to do Y.
Right.
You gotta really break it down.
You do. You got to show exactly where that money is going. And those projections, those numbers, they need to be realistic.
Yeah.
Don't inflate your expenses.
Right.
Don't underestimate your costs.
Right.
Be accurate, be transparent with those numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier the USDA Rural Development Office as a resource.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk a little bit more about how they can help folks with this process?
Yeah, they're a great resource. They can answer your questions. They can provide guidance that's really specific to your situation. They can even, maybe connect you with other producers in your area who've successfully used VAPG grants in the past.
Oh, that's great. So it's almost like having a mentor.
In a way, yeah. And the thing to remember is the folks at USDA Rural Development, they want to see you succeed.
Yeah.
So don't hesitate to reach out to them, ask questions.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but before we wrap up this section,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what excites you the most about VAPG and the impact that it can have on the forestry sector as a whole?
What excites me the most is the potential for innovation. I think these grants can really spark creativity and entrepreneurial spirit within the forestry community.
Yeah, it's about encouraging forest owners and businesses to create new products,
Right.
reach new markets, and build more resilient and profitable operations.
Exactly.
And ultimately, it's about contributing to a more vibrant and sustainable future
Yeah.
for the entire forestry industry, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's about creating a win-win situation for everyone involved.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired, but I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed with all this information.
Yeah.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's ready to take action and explore VAPG? Like, what's the first step?
My advice would be don't be afraid to reach out for help. The USDA Rural Development staff, they're there to guide you, to answer your questions, and make sure you're on the right track. And remember, FBS is here to support you as well.
Right.
We can help you navigate the process,
Yeah.
put together a strong application, increase your chances of success.
It sounds like having a good support system is really key.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we sign off for this segment, let's do a quick recap of those essential resources that we've mentioned
Okay.
throughout this episode.
So first and foremost, the USDA Rural Development website.
Yeah.
It's your one-stop shop for all things VAPG. You can find that self-assessment survey there, which, can help you determine if you might be eligible.
Right.
And don't forget, your local USDA Rural Development office can provide, personalized guidance and support as well.
Perfect. And of course, remember that FBS is here to provide practical assistance every step of the way. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these VAPG grants, I'm just curious, what really stands out to you about them?
I think one of the things that I find most compelling is that they can really level the playing field.
How so?
For forestry businesses, they can give those smaller operations the resources that they need
Cool.
to compete, to innovate, and to really make a mark
Yeah.
in the marketplace.
That's a good point. It's not just about the big players, these huge corporations.
Right.
VAPG can really empower those smaller, often family-run forestry businesses
Yeah.
to step up and create something special.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes beyond just the economic benefits too.
Yeah. In what way?
When these businesses succeed, it it ripples out into their communities.
Yeah.
It creates jobs. It supports local economies, and it helps, ensure the long-term health and vitality of our forests.
I think that's what I find so exciting about VAPG is that it's about more than just, dollars and cents. It's about, fostering a more sustainable and resilient future for the forestry industry and the communities that depend on it.
I couldn't agree more. It's a win-win.
It is.
For everyone involved.
I'm feeling inspired, but I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed with all this information.
Yeah.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's ready to take action and explore VAPG? What's the first step?
Don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Okay.
The USDA Rural Development staff, they're there to guide you, to answer your question, and to really make sure that you're on the right track. And remember, FBS is here to support you as well.
That's right.
We can help you navigate the process, put together a strong application, increase your chances of getting funded.
Yeah. It sounds like having a good support system is really key.
Absolutely.
So before we sign off, let's just do a quick recap of those essential resources that we've mentioned throughout this whole episode.
So first and foremost, the USDA Rural Development website. That's your one-stop shop for all things VAPG. You can find the self-assessment survey there, which can help you determine, if you're even potentially eligible for the program. And don't forget, your local USDA Rural Development office can provide, personalized guidance and support as well.
Perfect. And of course, remember that FBS is here to provide practical assistance every step of the way. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the SBS podcast. We hope you found this deep dive into VAPG valuable and that you're feeling empowered to explore these opportunities.
That's the goal.
Remember, we're here to support your success in the forestry industry. So be sure to subscribe to the FBS podcast for more informative episodes coming soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.